The sun was setting slowly in Uboko village, throwing long shadows across the dusty footpaths and the tiny houses that stood close together like family. It was the kind of evening when women returned from the farms with baskets on their heads and children played barefoot in the sand. That was the day a new face walked into the village, carrying nothing but a small bag on her head and determination in her heart. Her name was Uloma. She was not from Uboko. Uloma came from a faraway place called Umudara. No one in Uboko knew much about her story. They only knew she arrived quietly, looking for where to settle down. She found a small one-room house at the edge of the village. The house was small, but she used it as both her shop and her home. Inside, she slept on a mat. Outside, under the shade of a mango tree in front of her house, she placed a small stool, a wooden comb, and some bottles of oil. That was where she began her new life as a village hairstylist. In Uboko, things were simple. Most of the women kept their hair short, shaved close to the scalp with a razor or blade. Some did this because they worked hard in the farms and had no time for hair maintenance. Others did it because they had no money to spend on hairstyles. A few women plaited hair, but their work was rough, painful, and the styles did not last. It was normal for the hairdressers to sit all day waiting for a customer who might never come. But everything changed the day Uloma touched her first head of hair in Uboko. It happened one morning when a woman named Nnena stopped by Uloma's house. She had heard that the new tenant was a hairstylist and wanted to try her luck. Uloma welcomed her warmly, offered her a stool, and began her work. Her fingers moved gently but firmly. She parted the hair with neatness, applied oil with care, and plaited with such skill that Nnena barely felt pain. By the time Uloma finished, Nena's head sparkled with neat, shining braids that looked more beautiful than any style seen in Uboko before. As Nena walked home, other women saw her hair and their mouths fell open. "Who plaited this hair for you?" they asked. "It is the new woman, Uloma," Nena answered with a smile. That was how it all began. Within days, women lined up at Uloma's place. Some left their farms early, others borrowed money, and even those who had nothing struggled to gather a little coin just to sit on Uloma's stool. Her styles were different, beautiful, neat, and lasting. Women who never cared about hair before suddenly wanted to look fine. Even those who had always shaved their heads low began to grow their hair just so Uloma could plait it. The other hairdressers in Uboko were shocked. One of them, Chioma, who had been plaiting hair for years, though she barely had customers. Before Uloma came, she was used to sitting idle. But now, what little she had was gone. She sat on her stool all day watching women pass her house on their way to Uloma's. It pained her deeply. One afternoon, as Chioma sat outside, she overheard two women returning from Uloma's house. They were laughing and admiring their hair. "Her braids are so beautiful," one of them said. "And she doesn't even collect much money," the other replied. Chioma's heart sank. She thought of a plan. That evening, she told herself, "If it is money that is taking my customers away, then I will collect less than Uloma. When they see my price is cheaper, they will come back." From the next morning, Chioma reduced her charges. She announced to the women around her that she was willing to plait for almost nothing. Days passed. Still, no one came. She waited from sunrise to sunset, watching women hurry past her door to Uloma's. Finally, after a long wait, a young girl came. Chioma's face brightened with hope. She plaited the girl's hair carefully, took little money, and begged her silently in her heart to return. She even prayed that she would tell her friends how cheap and good she was. 2 months later, Chioma met the same girl on the road. She was carrying the basket on her head, but what caught Chioma's eyes was the girl's hair. It was a new style, neat and shining, one of Uloma's. "Ah, you have changed your hair," she said, pretending to smile. "Yes, I have," she replied. "But why didn't you come back to me? I would have made it for you again." The girl shook her head. "Your braids are not as beautiful as Uloma's. Her own lasts longer and looks finer. That's why I went back to her." Chioma felt like someone poured cold water on her heart. She managed to nod and walk away, but inside she was broken. She had lost again. Meanwhile, Uloma's fame spread faster and faster. Women from nearby compounds, nearby streets, and even nearby villages began to hear about her magic fingers. Some came only to see her work, while some swore they would never let anyone else touch their hair again. In Uboko, it became a saying, "If Uloma has not plaited your hair, you are not complete." Women who could not afford her services began to save money secretly. Some even quarreled with their husbands because they would rather starve for days than miss the chance to sit on Uloma's stool. The small room Uloma rented became the center of attraction. Every morning, women gathered there with baskets of food, gossip, and laughter. Children played around as they waited for their mothers. Men shook their heads as they passed by, wondering why their wives had suddenly turned restless. But to everyone else, Uloma was simply a gift from heaven, a woman who brought beauty and joy into their village. Chioma and the other women who also braid hair quietly nursed their pain, watching the woman who had stolen their world with nothing but a comb and a smile. The question whispered in the village was simple, but troubling. Why was it that before Uloma came, women were content with low cuts, but now every woman wanted hair on her head, no matter the cost? That question remained unanswered for now. The morning sun rose slowly over Uboko, lighting up the rooftops with golden rays. The village was already alive with sounds of pestles pounding yam, goats bleating in their pens, and women calling out to one another. But as usual, the loudest crowd was found in front of Uloma's small house. Her one-room apartment had become the busiest spot in the village. Women of all ages gathered, waiting for their turn. Some arrived with their children strapped to their backs. Others carried food baskets, ready to sit for hours while gossiping as Uloma's fingers worked magic on their heads. Uloma sat on her stool, calm as always, with her comb and oil beside her. Her fingers moved gently through each woman's hair, parting, twisting, and plaiting with speed and beauty. Each time she finished, there was gasping and clapping. Women would walk away swinging their heads proudly, as though they had been crowned queens. Chioma watched all this in silence from her house not far away. Her eyes burned with envy, but her heart was filled with helplessness. She had reduced her prices, begged silently, and even improved her plaiting as best as she could, yet nobody came to her anymore. It was as if Uloma's presence had erased her completely. One afternoon, Chioma decided to try again. She went to the marketplace, stood by her stall, and whispered to women she saw, "My sister, come to me. I will plait your hair cheaper than Uloma." But the women only smiled politely. Some even laughed and said, "Chioma, why are you disturbing yourself? Don't you know Uloma's hands are different?" That cut her deeply. It was as if everyone in Uboko was bewitched. Weeks passed and Chioma's bitterness grew. She was not the only one suffering. Other hairdressers in the village had stopped opening their stalls. They sat at home in shame, with no hope of customers. Uloma had taken them all. Then one day, something unusual happened. A woman from a neighboring village came to Uboko to buy cassava and vegetables in large quantities. She was tall and elegant, with the scarf tied neatly around her head. As she walked through the market, she heard women whispering about the great Uloma who could plait the most beautiful hair. Curious, she asked, "Who is this Uloma? Where can I find her?" By evening, she found herself sitting on Uloma's stool. She had planned to spend the night in Uboko, so she thought, why not try this hairstylist everyone was praising? Uloma welcomed her warmly, washed her hair, and began plaiting. The woman watched in the small mirror Uloma kept by her side, and her mouth fell open at how neat and fast the braids were. By the time Uloma was done, she looked like a queen. "This is indeed beautiful," the woman said, touching her head. She paid Uloma and stood up to leave, but before she left, she said something that changed everything in Uboko. "Give me the comb you used on my hair," she said. Uloma looked at her strangely. "What do you need my comb for?" The woman smiled politely. "I need to collect the strands of hair that came off while you were plaiting. Even the ones that fell on the ground, I must pack them. I don't leave my hair lying carelessly anywhere. I go home with all of it." The women sitting around looked at each other in surprise. Uloma frowned. "No, you don't need to do that," Uloma said. "I will throw them away myself." The woman shook her head firmly. "No. You can't throw away my hair. It is mine. I don't leave my hair in the hands of strangers." The arguments grew louder. Uloma refused, insisting she would dispose of the hair herself. The woman refused even more strongly, saying it was her right. The women gathered around began to murmur. "Why won't Uloma let her carry her own hair?" One whispered. "Yes, it is her hair. She should be free to take it. But why is Uloma so worried about it?" Another added. People from nearby houses heard the noise and came closer. Soon, a crowd gathered, listening to the strange quarrel between Uloma and the woman. The visitor stood her ground, picking strands of her hair from the ground, despite Uloma's protests. The argument refused to die down even after the woman collected every strand of her own hair from the comb and on the floor and left. That evening, news spread like wildfire across Uboko, from the market to the streams, from the farms to the village square. Everyone was asking the same question. Why didn't Uloma want the woman to take her own hair? Suspicion entered the hearts of the people. For the first time since Uloma came, some women began to watch her closely. They no longer just admired her skills, they'd started to whisper behind her back. The story traveled quickly, faster than anyone expected. Within a week, people in nearby villages were talking about the incident. Even far away umudara, the place Uloma had left behind, heard the gossip. Then the questions began to grow. Who exactly was Uloma? Where did she come from? Why does she live alone in a one-room house? Never had visitors, never visit family or speak of her children. And why is it that women who once preferred low cuts suddenly became obsessed with hair after she arrived? The more people thought about it, the more uncomfortable they became. Chioma, who had always been suspicious of Uloma, saw this as an opportunity. She began to whisper to her neighbors, "Don't you see something strange in all this? Before Uloma came, women were satisfied with low cuts, but now, everyone is restless until she touches their heads. Is it not strange?" The whispers grew louder. The elders began to pay attention. They had heard of people who used charms to control others, and they wondered if Uloma was one of them. At night, in different compounds, women sat with their husbands and spoke in low voices. "Since Uloma started plaiting my hair, I cannot rest until I go back to her," one woman confessed. Another added, "Sometimes I even quarrel with my husband just to gather money for her braids. I don't understand myself anymore." The men frowned. The elders frowned even more. It was no longer a small matter of hair, it was something deeper. That was how the investigation into Uloma's past began. The moon shone brightly over Uboko that night, bathing the village in silver light. But the people could not sleep. Rumors about Uloma had spread like wildfire. The small quarrel between her and the visiting woman over a few strands of hair had opened a doorway of questions that refused to close. The elders of Uboko gathered at the king's palace. They sat in a circle, their faces hard, their voices low and serious. The king himself, a tall man with sharp eyes, listened as one elder spoke. "My king, something is not right. Since this woman Uloma came, our wives have become restless. They abandon food, abandon children, and even quarrel with us just to gather money for her braids. And now she refuses to allow a woman carry her own hair strands. This is suspicious." Another elder nodded. "We must find out who she really is. Where did she come from? What kind of woman lives alone in a strange village, never visiting family, never speaking of her past?" A woman that comes to Uboko market from Umudara had secretly told some women that Uloma was from Umudara, but she didn't know much about Uloma. The king leaned forward. "Send word to Umudara. Let us know the truth about this Uloma." Messengers were dispatched at once. Days later, they returned with stories that shook the whole of Uboko. Uloma was no ordinary hairstylist. She had been chased out of her home village, Umudara. The people there said she was a dangerous woman, a witch who had harmed many. She was known to collect strands of people's hair, use them in charms, and bind their destinies without their knowledge. Her own children had abandoned her, running far away because they could no longer endure her wickedness. When the messengers told these things, the king's face darkened. "So we welcomed into our homes the very person another village rejected. No wonder everything has changed in Uboko since her arrival." News spread quickly. Women began to recount their strange experiences since Uloma started plaiting their hair. One woman stood in the marketplace and confessed, "Since Uloma began plaiting my hair, I no longer think of anything else. My husband gave me money for food, but I used it to plait my hair. My children cried of hunger, but I told them to wait. I could not help myself. My marriage is now broken because of this." Another woman added, "My farm used to give me plenty harvest, but after Uloma touched my hair, everything dried up. Yet I still kept going back to her, as if my head was no longer my own." Yet another woman cried out, "I sold my best cloth just to plait my hair with Uloma. It was as if something inside me pushed me. I was no longer myself." The stories poured out one after another. It became clear that Uloma's braiding was not ordinary. Her hands carried power that tied people's hearts and destinies without their knowledge. Chioma, the hairdresser who had lost all her customers, spoke with trembling voice. "I knew it. I knew something was wrong. Even when I reduced my prices, even when I begged silently, nobody returned. It was not just skill. It was something darker that held them to her." The villagers were angry. They felt deceived, trapped, and enslaved. Women wailed for their wasted money, their broken marriages, their lost harvests. Men clenched their fists, remembering the hunger and quarrels in their homes. The king called the people to the village square. Everyone gathered, from children to the oldest elders. Uloma was brought before them. She stood tall, her face calm, as if nothing troubled her. The silence was heavier than words. The crowd shouted, "It is true! Send her away! Drive her from Uboko!" The king raised his hand and the people grew quiet. "Uloma, you can no longer stay in Uboko. From today, you are banished. Leave this village and never return. And let this be a warning to us all. Every stranger must be known before they are welcomed, for all that glitters is not gold." The people cheered in agreement. Uloma was led away, her small bag on her head, the same way she had entered the village months ago. This time, there were no smiles, no excitement, but only anger and fear following her steps. As she walked out of Uboko, women touched their heads nervously, as if trying to free themselves from her invisible grip. Men held their wives and children closer, thanking the gods that the truth had come out. That night, Uboko village breathed a sigh of relief. The women who had once been restless felt a strange calm return to their hearts. Slowly, they began to cut their hair again or visit the other hairdressers. Chioma and the others smiled once more as customers began to return to them. But the memory of Uloma lingered in Uboko. Whenever the women of Uboko gathered to talk, they would shake their heads and say, "Beauty can be dangerous, so not every shining gift is good. Let us always be careful." And so the story of Uloma, the village hairdresser who bewitched with her comb, remained in Uboko for generations, a warning that not everything that makes you shine truly makes you whole.